right, it looks like we're recording. So good evening, everyone. Welcome to the February 22nd, 2021 regular meeting of the Township of Montclair Planning Board. In accordance with the New Jersey Open Public Meetings Act, adequate notice of this meeting has been prepared by posting a copy of the notice on the first floor of the municipal building and by sending a copy of the newsletter, or sending a copy to the newspaper designated by the township for notices. Electronic notice of this meeting has also been provided by posting a copy of the meeting notice along with meeting access instructions to the township website and to the main access door of the municipal building. This meeting is being broadcast live on channel 34 and is streamed live and will be available on demand on YouTube. This meeting is a quasi-judicial proceeding, meaning the board has powers and procedures resembling a court of law, and we are obligated to objectively determine facts and draw conclusions from them in order to provide the basis of an official action. Any questions or comments must be limited to the issues of what the board may legally consider and reaching a decision, and the decorum appropriate to a judicial hearing must be maintained at all times. Members of the public are automatically placed on mute on this forum until such time that the meeting is open for public questions or comments. At that time, members of the public will be unmuted and they may provide verbal questions or comments as appropriate. Once unmuted, members of the public using the Cisco WebEx platform will need to use the Connect Audio button to connect their microphone prior to speaking. Members of the public may also direct questions or comments to Ms. Talley, the board secretary, via the chat or question and answer features of the WebEx platform, or by emailing jtalley, which is JTALLEY at montclairusa.org. As to the order of tonight's meeting, each application hearing will begin with the applicant or their attorney giving an overview of the application and the variances that are required, if any. We then hear from any expert witnesses the applicant may have to help explain the application and why variances are required. The board members may ask questions of the applicant, the attorney, and their expert witnesses. If you are a member of the interested public but not a witness in the case, you will have 2 opportunities to speak. At the end of each witness's testimony, you will be given the opportunity to ask the witness questions about his or her testimony. That is not the time to tell the board what you think of the application, however. That comes later. To ask questions once members of the public are unmuted, let us know you would like to ask a question, and when called upon, give us your name and address, and then ask your questions related to the witness's testimony only. After the applicant's witnesses and any objector or objector witnesses have been heard, members of the audience will have their second opportunity to step forward. At that time, you may express your opinions, positive or negative, about the application. Comments are generally limited to 3 minutes per person. An additional time that the public may be heard is when 1 or more residents present to the board as an objector to an application. Objectors may be represented by counsel and present their cases, including independent evidence and witnesses for the board to consider after the applicant has finished its case. Different from public comment, objectors and their witnesses are expected to present evidence for the board to consider, as opposed to only their personal opinions, and will be subject to cross-examination by the public and by the applicant. At the completion of the applicant's case, the objector's case, and public comment, the public hearing is closed and the board members discuss the case and vote. You will be able to listen to our discussion, but you will not be able to participate. And first up is roll call.
Hold on, Carol, is this you? Are you have you called in? I've unmuted you. Who is 973-746? Call-in user? You're unmuted. Okay, well now you're muted. Okay, I will do the roll call. Chair Wynn? Vice Chair Brodock,
I'm here.
Mayor Spiller,
Present.
and Mr. Cook,
Present.
Counselor Schlager,
Here.
Miss Willis, Mr. Rooney,
Here.
Mr. Ian Wally,
Here.
Ms. Lockman,
Here.
Mr. Gilmer.
Here.
Okay. And we also have Board Attorney Arthur Neese. We have Board Engineer Peter Chandler, right? And Jerry Chiosa and Mike Danamiller, who are the also board consultants.
Yes.
Okay.
Great. Next up, we have approval of the minutes from the meeting of January 25th of this year.
Are there any changes to the minutes? There being none, is there a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Abstentions?
I abstained. I didn't hear that application. I
Okay.
was there for part of the meeting.
Okay, I got it.
Yeah.
And Daniel as well, abstaining.
And Daniel, right. Okay, good.
All right. Next up is the continuation of application 2705 Montclair Acquisition Partners, LLC, the Orange Road parking deck.
So Tom Troutner, I just made you a panelist. You should turn your audio on.
Arthur and Janice, this is Tony. I'm recused from this, so I'll step away. If there's anything later, if you could send me a text, I'd be happy to jump back on later. Okay, so I'll sign
Okay.
off now.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Tom, if you, I'll unmute you. If you could tell me which experts you want me to make panelists for this evening?
Great, thank you, Janice. So we have with us this evening Joe Casillo from Elcor or MAP, the applicant. We have Kristen Sokich from ProPark America. We have James Miller, our professional planner. And then if you wouldn't mind, Janice, just in case they need to speak, we have Brian Barry from the applicant MAP. We have Tim Tracy from Desmond Engineering, and we have Michelle Bryhoff from Mason.
Okay, I've made them all panelists, so you all have the ability to unmute yourselves and answer questions or make your presentation.
Great, thank you, Janice. Great, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So,
Can I ask you for one question, Tom? Is there any exhibits you want me to bring up that you're going to speak from?
Oh, yes, Janice, I could envision that we are going to possibly take a look at that that site plan that I had forwarded. It's the one from the prior application that's got the it's colorized version of the facade with, it's like 2 pages with some insets on the second page.
I'll pull that up, yes, okay.
And then additionally, I could envision that Mr. Sokich's parking plan we might need to look at.
Okay.
Thank you, Janice. So with that being said, thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. Again, we're here for minor site plan approval to discuss the removal of a certain lift and slide automated parking system that was internal to this structure, the Orange Road deck, and to extend in place of that lift and slide automated parking system the floor plates, so to attempt to make up for some lost parking. When we were last here, the board had asked for a few items, and Janice, I just realized there's another one from what we just referred to. You had asked for an elevation of the facade that was previously approved, which we submitted, and perhaps Janice could allow for that to be shown. I just popped up on the screen. Additionally, the board had asked for a parking management plan or parking plan to be submitted by our valet consultant, which we've also submitted. And finally, the board had asked if it would be possible to obtain a site plan which would clarify a certain encroachment of 8 inches into the right-of-way along the Orange Road frontage that was the subject of an approval that this board granted in 2017. We thought that we would need to create that from scratch, but then in looking through our files, we discovered or recalled that there was a exhibit that was submitted. It's referenced in the 2017 resolution of approval as Exhibit A9 at that time. It's a colorized site plan which depicts the encroachments I just spoke about, kind of shows what I'll characterize as they're somewhat de minimis. There's 8 inches at one column, 7 inches at another column, and otherwise a few inches on a partial run of the south side of the facade along Orange Road. We'll speak about these that exhibit in testimony this evening. My, I guess, point in saying what I just said a moment ago is that there was some question about how that encroachment might impact parking to be gained or lost as a result of either the continued existence of that encroachment or the lack of the existence of that encroachment. And I think the exhibit speaks for itself, but I think it would reveal that it doesn't affect the parking one way or the other. So with that being said, we have 3 witnesses this evening. We have Joe Casillo from the applicant. He'll be brought as a fact witness, so to speak to some issues related to that encroachment. We have Kristen Sokich from ProPark America, our expert on valet parking. And finally, we have James Miller, a professional planner. So, Mr. Chairman, with your permission, I'd have Mr. Casillo sworn in. We can, if that's acceptable.
Yep, it is.
Great.
Mr. Casillo, can you hear me, sir?
It doesn't appear that Mr. Casillo's audio is connected at the moment, nor Mr. Miller's, nor Mr. Barry's.
Oh, there he is.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay.
Is that you, Mr. Casillo?
Yes, sir.
Would you raise your right hand, please? Do you solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Would you please state your full name and business affiliation for the record?
Joseph Casillo, Project Executive for MAP Urban Renewal, LLC.
Mr. Casillo, how long have you been employed by MAP or I guess its affiliate Elcor?
About 15 years.
Okay,
With
great.
Elcor.
And your title is a project executive. How long have you held that title?
Going on 2 years now.
Okay, great. Now, what are the duties and responsibilities you have associated with your title at MAP?
One of my duties is overall project coordination from inception to budgeting to implementation, construction, and completion, with obviously the owner's best interest at heart. Coordinating the project with all the design professionals, construction managers, local jurisdictions, reviewing of general contractor budgets and cost estimates and things of that nature.
And you're familiar with the subject of the application that MAP is presenting this evening?
Yes.
And you're familiar with the Orange Road deck and this project in general?
Yes.
And you oversee this project in accordance with your duties and responsibilities at MAP?
Yes.
And I believe you may have actually even testified in 2017, if I recall, at least in a limited capacity regarding this project.
Yes, I did.
Okay. So now, Mr. Casillo, you heard the testimony previously where I believe the board has, or members of the board have been contemplating whether or not the 8-inch encroachment into the right-of-way that was granted by this board in 2017, if that should continue in light of the fact that the lift and slide is being removed. The question I'll ask is if we don't move the facade back 8 inches, if that facade stays where it is, what is the approximate cost that MAP is incurring to basically build the facade that was approved in 2017?
Excuse me, before you go any further, is MAP Montclair Acquisition Partners?
It is, yes.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Okay.
And Tom, can I ask you, can you repeat that question?
Sure. So if I was asked, what I wanted to ask Mr. Casilla, what Casilla was, there's been some discussion about whether the facade, can or should be moved back 8 inches or not. Starting from the premise, if the facade is not being moved back 8 inches, if the building is just going to be constructed with the facade where it is right now as approved in 2017, what is the approximate cost to construct that facade?
Our approximate cost for that work is $2.8 million.
And what does that 2.8 million that you're coming up with generally entail?
It consists of the hard cost. The lift slide hard cost number was around 2.5 million. The actual hard cost for the facade system itself. Associated with that is the soft cost fees, which is the architects, the engineering fees for the garage analysis, the foundation design, the weight analysis for the facade wall, as well as the attachment analysis to the lift slide to support steel, all of the moment connections, everything that's has to do with the system itself.
Right,
Came out to about 2.8 million.
Right now, and Mr. Casilla, I think my understanding is that there may have been the actual cost of the lift and slide system would be in addition to the 2.8 million. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
So
the system itself came out to, and this includes the design of the system, the fabrication, the delivery from overseas, the procurement, the installation, all of the engineering came out to 1.9 million.
So I guess I'll say rounding up, what's the what would have been the total all in had the lift and slide continue to remain a viable option?
Total cost approximately 4.8.
Right. Now as was testified to at the prior hearing, the lift and slide does not continue to be a viable option. So the proposal is to extend the floor plates. Does that come at a cost that's in addition to the 4.8 million you just spoke about?
Yes, sir. So to remove the lift slide system out of the cavity that it currently exists, to extend the floor plates on every floor of the parking deck, it's an additional $580,000.
So my question then would be, so what is the total cost then, kind of all in, if the facade stays where it is, it's not moved back 8 inches, the facade stays where it is, but we're extending the floor plates. What is the all-in number for this?
All in approximately 5.4 million.
Okay. Now, as we sort of started this conversation, it's been suggested by the board, or members of the board, that perhaps that facade should be moved back 8 inches because that lift and slide is now not going to be utilized. If you were going to move the facade back 8 inches, would it cost more than 5.4 million? Is there a cost associated with moving the facade back 8 inches that's in addition to what we've already talked about?
Yes, there is. So we're approximating that to demolish the lift slide in order to move the system back the 8 inches would cost an additional $445,000, and that would consist of removing the facade wall framing that exists now, demolishing the concrete foundation wall that exists now, and repositioning the steel that can be reused in the 8-inch new location. And then if we were to tack on reconstruction of that facade wall, support steel and everything in that new location, we're estimating an additional $500,000 on top of that. So for a grand total of an approximate $945,000 to undertake that exercise.
So I guess to recap then, so your testimony then, all in, if the facade remains where it is, with the removal of the lift and slide mechanism and extending the floor plates, that's about 5.4 million. But if in addition you had to move the facade back 8 inches, you would tack on another $945,000 to that. So about an all-in cost of $6.4 million or a little less.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. Now, I just in your experience, is that you've given out some estimates. I mean, would you say those estimates are, conservative? Are they low? Are they high? How would you characterize them?
At this point, we feel that they're conservative. The estimates could be higher, but we feel pretty confident in the conservative nature that we've taken so far.
Okay. Now, in addition to just a cost, question, with focusing now on the demolition of the facade wall and the concrete foundation wall and the repositioning of the steel structure, as you testified to, that would be involved in moving the facade back 8 inches. What does that demolition look like, and are there any concerns operationally or for safety-wise or otherwise?
Well, I mean, considering the garage is an active operation, I mean, safety is paramount for one. So the lift slide support structure, as well as the facade and the roof framing of the facade, has some significant members. Some of these members are 25 feet long. Some of the W14 members are, 14 by 54s. So that's 54 pounds per foot times 25 feet. So, handling those types of members 60 feet in the air on a man lift is challenging, to say the least, for the workers, for the public at large. Cranes will have to be, at least one crane will have to be introduced to safely take some of the higher members down. Most of this steel would have to be disassembled by hand, whether it's cutting, unbolting, torching. So that, that whole section of the street would have to be closed off for a while. The sidewalk would have to be closed off for a while. The operations of the garage would be impacted. The vehicles that are parked on the 2nd through 5th floor, along where the system is, would have to be pushed off of that perimeter for safety for the vehicles and the pedestrians. The material, once it does come down, there'll be a lot of it. So there's going to be a lot of off-site trucking and dumpsters and things of that nature. So it will be it's an arduous task, to say the least, along with duration. Like I said, it's going to be done by hand. So time is going to be, you're not just going to come in and start ripping things down. You're going to do it in a very controlled manner. So that section of Orange Road will be, quite busy for a while.
Okay. I actually have no further questions of Mr. Cassillo, Mr. Chairman, but certainly if the board has questions or the public.
I'm curious, Mr. Cassillo, what's going to be the construction plan when you're putting the facade on the building?
Well, the facade on the building, since it's made up of, let's call it cold form steel, it's relatively light. So the framing that has gone up now has gone up pretty much with man lifts and some lulls and things of that nature. The facade elements that we're going to clad to the framing is thin brick veneer, again, relatively light. Stucco and Den's glass, which is like the yellow sheathing that you might have seen on exterior of buildings. That's relatively light. That's kind of shot into the backside of the panel, and then you come up with a field applied stucco coat, which again, stucco is light. A lot of it's done by hand off of potential scaffolding, man lifts, things of that nature. So there's not really heavy machinery needed or heavy handling of heavy steel members at this point.
So while you're doing that process for the facade, the public's able to access the sidewalk in front of the building, or in front of the parking deck?
I believe the sidewalk is closed down when we do have the man lifts going back and forth. We have an agreement with the police department of Montclair to close that section off, and they were quite adamant on whenever the man lifts are moving, let's call it northwest or north-south, excuse me, along Orange Road, that they don't want any pedestrians in that area, which obviously makes all the sense in the world. So between our parking authority that maintains any pedestrian crossing from the interior of the garage out to Orange Road by accident, they keep everybody out of there. The contractor always has at least 2 guys on the sidewalk area at both Board of Ed Drive and Central Verde Drive over by the old Ferrara gas station, just to make sure nobody kind of, meanders into the work zone.
And so does that mean that, vehicular access in and out of the front of the parking deck is also kind of inhibited or changed during that time?
Vehicular access has been closed to the Orange Road exit for a while. The entrance and exit to the garage has been off of Central Verde, I believe, for some time now. And I think Mr. Silikich could probably speak to that, but I believe that's an exit to the garage at this point.
Like, I guess where I'm struggling is I don't see the difference between the facade work and the pedestrian safety aspects and, the pedestrian impacts and the township, public impacts versus removing and putting up steel. It seems like it's effectively the same thing, perhaps different machinery, perhaps a crane instead of a lull, but the impacts to the pedestrians and the public seem to be similar. Sidewalks already closed. Entrance and exit of vehicles from Orange Road is still closed. Doesn't seem to be any different to me.
If you set up a crane in Orange Road and you start swinging steel to lower it down, you have a lot of flatbeds along Orange Road, 18-wheelers, blind spots coming out of Board of Ed. We've been there when the parents have dropped off their kids. I mean, a lot of times there's some significant blind spots that need to be accounted for. And the steel guys, the way they work is a little bit slower than just putting up lighter aluminum cold form framing, which you can do from a man lift. Like I said, some of these steel members, you really can't take them down when you have the man lift extended 60 feet up and you have two guys in the bucket of the lift to handle a 400-pound steel beam. A lot of them won't do that. They'll want to hook it up to a crane, have the crane lower it down. The crane size itself, with the outriggers and everything, that will come into Orange Road much further than just a man lift on a sidewalk.
Sure.
So it's an operation either way. I mean, it's
right, and you did say there were people kind of at the edges that would make sure the public's safe. They've got people there full time and watching out for it. It sounds like you've got the contingencies put in place to make sure that people are safe during those operations.
Mm-hmm.
And Mr. Troutner, with respect to the cost discussion, I mean, the board, as far as I know, doesn't consider cost in its evaluation. What's the purpose of that testimony?
So we have a professional planner to testify this evening, and while we're not raising cost in the sense of this is of a greater tax value to the residents, it's really more, it's going to go to the question of the balancing of equities and hardship elements if the board was, or members of the board are contemplating potentially rescinding a prior variance. So that's just to lay the direction of where that's going. But we needed to establish at least something on the record.
Can I
see other questions from the board?
Yeah, I have a question. So, you're painting this dire picture of a delay, a time delay, safety issues, a disruption, and cost. And I'd like, since you brought it up, I'd like to focus on the cost. I mean, I would imagine you have a claim against an insurance company or a general contractor for a product defect. So some of that cost is going to be recovered, I would expect, from an insurance company or the pocket of whomever is responsible for building this falsely designed or falsely installed piece of equipment. So, I kind of feel like, why are you bringing up these costs when you're not going to, you told us that there's litigation surrounding this this problem we are having, but you're not going to tell us what your recovery is expected. But I do expect that you'll have recovery, some of the costs that you're incurring to either take out this lift and slide thing or to do some remediation of the problem that exists.
Well, I can let Mr. Casello answer, at least as the insurance. My understanding is that there is no insurance claim that would be associated with this. There is litigation, as was previously mentioned, involved with the manufacturer and installer regarding the lift and slide mechanism. However, the idea that there's an assured recovery would be speculative. Look, I can't speak obviously to the litigation. I'm not handling the litigation, but just in my own just general experience as an attorney, it's one thing to potentially think you're going to get a judgment. It's another thing to think that you're going to get damages beyond your contract amount. And then it's an entirely different thing to think that you might even be able to collect certain amounts from what are often single purpose entities that may declare bankruptcy or do other things. And I'm not suggesting any of that is relevant to this particular case, but that's just in general sometimes how law works. So I say that in the sense that, I'm not quibbling that the points you're raising are perhaps not things that you could reasonably think about, but it's speculation. It's certainly not any assured. Money's not going to be an issue because this will all be recovered. And Joe, is that correct about the insurance?
Is it the lift and slide mechanism that's defective? Is that why you're taking it out?
Yes, the lift and slide, we are concerned that if we were to install the lift and slide mechanism, that at minimum it won't work.
So, and that was built by some large corporation or some entity that is the responsible entity that works for this type of construction?
So again, I'm not handling that litigation, but my understanding is, so I guess it's designed by somebody, it's supposed to be installed by somebody, and the who's going to point fingers at who, I don't know, but there is litigation.
So you have a multi-billion-dollar project, and now you have one of the major components of your project is defective, and you're suggesting to me that you're not certain, or there's minimal possibility of recovery some of those costs from an insurance company or a solvent contractor who did this work or engineering firm?
Well, so there's no insurance recovery, and I obviously I can't speak to whether or not somebody is or isn't solvent if a judgment is entered against them, or if even there will be a judgment entered against them. For these would be damages, I presume they would be in excess of the contract amount. So all I'm saying is that it's speculation. I guess it could happen. It might. It may not happen. And our point in raising this, and this will be addressed more succinctly in our planner's testimony, but is that there's a lot of money involved here, and there's a lot of complexities that would be involved in moving the facade back 8 inches. And as our planner will speak to, balancing the equities on the advantages of moving the facade back 8 inches versus all of what we just mentioned. We think it's not reasonable to demand or ask that the applicant move the facade back 8 inches.
Yeah, I understand, but you're raising up the costs as a potential hardship. And I'm suggesting that it may not be such a hardship if there's a potential for recovery against another party, responsible party for this defect. That's all.
I'd like to jump in just for a moment here and tell you that I have seen a copy of the complaint, and I don't want the board to believe that, at least based on my reading of the complaint, I don't want the board to believe that it's a product defect litigation, because it's not. It's a breach of contract action, and the notion of defective materials or systems or anything like that does not figure anywhere in the complaint that I read. That's not to say that the complaint can't be amended, that some other claims will be later asserted, but at this point in time, there are only 2 contract claims. So I just want to give the board that insight.
Other questions from the board?
Yes, this is Robin. Go ahead.
No, go ahead, Robin.
Oh, okay. All right. Thanks, Daniel. So Mr. Castillo, I assume, so you've already met with the police department? You mentioned the police, so you've met with them already?
Yes.
And okay. And if the building went back 8 inches, what would you lose in the interior of the footprint of the building? Other than a cost to move things, but what would be lost?
Councilman Schleger and Planning Board Member Schleger, I think Mr. Miller, our next witness, can speak to this more succinctly. And as you'll see in the drawing, and I don't want to put Joe too much on the spot. Joe, maybe you're familiar with this, and Robin could. I'm sorry, Janice, maybe bring up the site plan that has the insets. There are two columns where there's about a 7 and 8 inch encroachment, and then there's a stretch on the south part of the building where the facade starts at 4 inches and then goes down to, I think, 0 inches as you get near the columns in question. The short answer is it's I think, and Joe, you can tell me if I'm correct. I think it would be rather elaborate to pull the whole building back, but the blunt answer is I don't think that it would have any impact at all in terms of the parking that exists in the building. You don't pick up, you don't gain any, and you don't lose any. It's the encroachments are related to the facade that's on the exterior.
Correct.
Okay. And if this was to go ahead, if things moved ahead, maybe Janice Talley knows the answer. What would the timing be of the work, this very disruptive work, as Mr. Casillo mentioned, on Orange Road? What would be the timing with the building of the adjacent building where Ferrara's auto body was? A new building is going there. So what would be the timing and of the work for each building?
Robin, I can't answer that because that's dependent on when the developer is ready to get started with the adjacent project.
Joe, can you speak to, I guess, at least imagine that we were approved this evening. What would you anticipate would be a reasonable time frame? Bearing in mind, I guess as a small period of time for resolution compliance and to continue and complete the work to build the building, the facade as was approved in 2017.
So just so I'm clear, so to continue the facade work as it stands today, is that what you're asking?
Yes, correct. Because some of it's already correct.
Yeah, a lot of it is already framed. I think the duration to complete it would probably be in the neighborhood of 2 to 3 months, only because some of the elements are weather dependent. Primarily the stucco finish. You really can't do stucco in these temperatures. So you probably would need to be somewhere in the middle of April before you do doing stucco. So I would estimate we're in March already, so March, April, probably close to about 3 months.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Gilmer?
Yes. So, yes. Mr. Gilmer here. Thank you for the testimony tonight. So, also reviewing what we discussed last time. At the last meeting, Mr. Berry noted that the lift and shift slide is not feasible, and appreciate you mentioning the claims that are in that litigation, because that was actually a question I was going to raise as well. So again, and I know we discussed this a bit at the last time, so can you help me understand how this is not, a mistake that it seems like it's a mistake that may have occurred? Like Mr. Troutner, what's the best way for us to understand as a board? Because even the questions that have been asked tonight are kind of understanding the challenges, with the lift and shift, but we can't get into some of the details of litigation, and there's concerns around costs that are raised tonight, which, similar to what Chair Nguyen mentioned at the last meeting, it seems as though considerations of cost to a certain degree are out of scope for what we're considering tonight. So if you could just help me understand, what led to the change in plans away from the lift and shift, and then also how cost is kind of in scope for what we're deciding tonight. Because what we already approved many years ago was a concession to a degree, a variance that was granted, and even what was in that resolution is not now being satisfied. So it's just a little difficult, I think, for some of us to now consider an additional variance when the previous one was not, the previous resolution was not abided by, in part for reasons that it seems like we are not fully privy to even now.
Sure. So, well, I'll do my best to try and answer some of that. And the trick and Mr. Neese will hopefully agree with me, is that the short answer is we do not believe that if we were to attempt to complete the installation of the lift and slide automated parking system, that it would work. And we have additional concerns about it structurally. That's all the subject of the lawsuit. And my apologies, I realize it may sound like we're being cagey because we're not being exhaustively detailed about those allegations in the litigation. Part of the problem is there's it's the subject of an ongoing litigation. There's something, it's like this idea of qualified immunity. Like within the litigation, you can say things, but outside of the litigation, it gets a little more gray before people start getting upset about what you are or not saying about a defendant in a lawsuit. So we're somewhat constrained about what we can talk about, but except to say it is our belief and concern that I'm going to make this sound rather extreme. Like, let's say you were to completely deny this application and say, MAP, we want you to install the lift and slide mechanism. Our concern is we would install it and it would never work, which is what led us to make the painful decision, and this is part of Mr. Casilla's testimony, that we would need to change direction, not install the lift and slide, and the space, and the lift and slide again being internal in the building behind the facade, that if we were to not install it and instead extend the floor plates, we believe we could still achieve enough parking to satisfy the intent of the redevelopment plan to have adequate parking for the redevelopment projects. And it's going to cost us more money, specifically at least about another $600,000 to do it this way, as opposed to if we could just install the lift and slide and and be happy with it, and have everyone happy with it. We think you won't be happy with us if it doesn't work. So what we're trying to avoid then, in terms of bringing up the cost, is that rather than just spending another $600,000 or more to extend the floor plates, that we're not also spending another $1 million to try and pull back the building 8 inches. And this will be explored in Mr. Miller's testimony, which will come a little bit later tonight. But the point being that it's what we would characterize as such a de minimis encroachment into the right-of-way that was in part caused by the lift and slide, and it's also in part caused by certain preferences for the facade that was put on the building, and it's just such a de minimis encroachment at a couple spots with a full-size sidewalk in front of the building that's 4 feet wide, with another 6 or 8 feet of green area between the sidewalk and the curb, that the impact on the applicant, if you were to balance equities and consider hardship in this particular instance, and Mr. Miller, our planner, will speak to why you should consider hardship in this instance, that $1 million cost to pull something back 8 inches is we would characterize it just it's not a reasonable ask. And by way of some analogy, there's you could think of an example where a homeowner in town perhaps builds a deck in their backyard illegally and then gets caught and then comes to this board and begs for a variance so that they can keep their deck. There's some analogy to that type of situation here, except for, we don't consider that we did anything wrong. We didn't build something illegally and then now are begging for forgiveness. What we're saying is we've spent a lot of money to put up a facade that was approved in 2017, and we don't want to have to tear it all down just to pull back a couple inches when the pulling back of a couple inches doesn't seem to serve any real necessity, planning or otherwise. And again, I'm starting to testify for the planner, and we should really wait till we get to his testimony, but doesn't really seem to serve any purpose other than just saying, well, it's just, the principle of the thing. We think the law and the planning consideration should merit towards this board considering allowing us to continue with the facade as previously approved in 2017, where it is currently located, and that the 8 inches is really a de minimis issue.
Tom, if I might, I think Mr. Gilmer's question might be answered if you were, and I don't know if you want to do this, but if you were to disclose whether or not you've had an expert review the lift and slide mechanism and opine that it would not be able to work? Or is this just an internal decision that has been made by MAP that it's not going to work and therefore you're going to replace it out? I may be being presumptuous, Daniel, but I think that might go to answering your question.
Yeah, it would help in part, Mr. Troutner. Yes.
Sure. I don't know if Mr. Casillo, can you, I mean, I have to imagine it's not like you or Brian Barry personally just one day woke up and thought this thing doesn't work. Can I assume, they maybe not have put a report out in the litigation yet, but I assume you've had professionals look at this independently and opine on this?
I mean, I don't know if Brian, you want me to, again, I'm not sure.
Or Mr. Barrett, if you can answer that question.
Yeah. I mean, I could shed some light. I'm not too sure how much I can say. At a high level.
Yeah, at a high level, I guess, trying to take off what Mr. Neese says.
At a high level, we have had 5 separate professionals in this field come out and take a look at this system, and all 5 have declined for a multitude of reasons to get involved with it.
And when you say get involved, you mean completed the system or have?
Yes, take ownership of the design and complete the installation as it is. Again, for a multitude of reasons. We also have the 6th expert coming from across country. He was supposed to be here last week. Unfortunately, the weather delayed him. He is due out this Thursday for another opinion. So again, at a high level, we have taken the extra steps, let's say, to investigate further. To Tom's point, we didn't just wake up one day and say, "Oh, we're not using the system. Forget about it." We have taken.
Yeah, and short answer, even if you get everything you asked for here tonight, it's still going to cost you $600,000 more than it would have a few months ago. Yes, if you could just put the lift and slide in. So it's not in your financial interest, fair to say, to take the lift and slide out?
No. No.
Right. No, and that makes sense. And just to make sure we're clear on this point, the concerns that have been raised by these experts were not foreseeable when this application came to the board before?
Correct. You're asking me that? Yes, correct.
Are these people
right,
experts?
Yeah,
I'm sorry, Daniel. Are they experts or are they just contractors who are coming in to take up the construction or the doing of the creating of the lift and slide and decline to do so because of whatever reason, because of the proprietary nature of the lift and slide or whatever? Are they experts or are they just contractors who refuse to do it?
No, they are, and Tom, if I may, they are experts in the field of automotive parking systems. All 5 of these outfits design, fabricate, and install their systems. So short answer, they wouldn't just be a miscellaneous steel contractor to come in and finish the work. They have a design parameters as well. And engineering.
So basically, they told you, and forgive me, I'm not trying to be a hard nose about it, but basically they told you they wouldn't touch this lift and slide mechanism with a 10-foot pole.
Yes, sir.
Did they tell you why?
I'm sorry, did they tell us, did they say why?
Did they tell you why they wouldn't do it?
Joe, I just don't want to get you in trouble. So
yeah, I know.
Maybe at a high level answer. I mean, if you want to give the answer, because if this is true, if they said because we don't think it'll work, that's probably. I don't want you to struggle and start saying stuff that you shouldn't.
Yeah, I mean, I guess for lack of a better term, they don't believe it'll work for, again, a multitude of reasons. They would not get involved. They would not warranty anything. Yeah, for a high level response, they just they kind of scratched their heads and looked at us and say that this is not going to work. Without getting too far into the detail of why.
Daniel, I apologize for preempting you.
No, that's
Vice,
very helpful, actually. Yep.
Vice Chair Brodock, I want to note that Chair Nguyen joined the meeting at 7:57 and Ms. Willis joined the meeting at 7:45. Carol, I don't think you have your audio turned on, so if you want to ask any questions, you need to turn on the audio on your computer.
I did turn it on. Can you hear me?
Oh, now I can hear you. Good. Okay.
Yes. I had a question at one point, and it was basically to try to figure out at the last meeting, when I asked the question, was this problem with the lift and slide one that was going to cost us parking spaces? And I believe at that time, I was told that the answer was that it would be so many, about probably 3 per level. So now I hear today that there is no change in that. And I was wondering did I miss something, or can you clarify what the impact is on the number of parking spaces?
So yeah, my understanding, and we can actually, Joe, you probably could confirm this. There's no impact on the parking spaces, and Ms. Willis, unfortunately, when we were here at the last meeting, we were operating under a mistaken assumption that more of the front of the building was within the 8-inch encroachment than actually is. When we found the exhibit, which we've now produced, there's a page on the screen right now which has the label CS102. There's certain insets that are drawn on this document which reveal the manner in which the encroachment occurs. There's an inset A which shows a 4-inch encroachment into the right-of-way at the southern end of the building along Orange Road. Inset B shows a certain column which is encroaching 8 inches into the right-of-way. Inset C shows a certain column which is encroaching 7 inches into the right-of-way. And then inset D reveals that by the time you get to the northern edge of the building, or actually much before that, probably really starting where at inset C and all the way across to inset D, that the building is actually behind the encroachment line. So in other words, there's no right-of-way encroachment. But the short answer is these encroachments are rather de minimis. And because they're de minimis, if the facade of the building was to be required to be pulled back, it wouldn't affect parking one way or the other. We wouldn't gain any parking spaces, but we also wouldn't lose any parking spaces. It really, the encroachments are really related to the facade elements of the building. It's not so much that as enough of the building is sticking out that it would cause a loss in parking, or conversely a gain in parking if you let us keep it.
Thank you.
I have another question.
Yes, yeah.
I'm sorry, Daniel. Were you done, Daniel?
I was not earlier, but fine to go, and then I can come back to mine.
Okay. So I'm a little, so if you could explain to me, Elcor and MAP bought the parking deck from another entity recently?
Well, it wasn't recent, but I believe it was actually acquired from the township, and the township previously acquired it from DCH Auto.
Correct.
So the town built the parking deck?
I believe DCH Auto built the parking deck. It was originally built to store their auto inventory.
Okay, so then when Elcor and MAP bought the building, did they not have like an inspector go through it and find out that the parking mechanisms, that the lift and slide wasn't working? I mean, it's like when you buy a house, you have an inspector, so you don't buy a house and find out that the elevator doesn't work.
Sure, no. So
it wasn't there, ma'am. It wasn't there at the time, ma'am. When we purchased the property in 2012, I think it was, the lift slide didn't exist.
So Councilmember, so just by way of just quick background, the this deck was owned by DCH, then it was acquired by the township, and then in conjunction with the kind of the development of the Montclair Center Gateway Phase 1 redevelopment plan, MAP got involved. MAP obtained site plan approval after being, or in conjunction with being designated redeveloper of the, the whole Valley and Bloom redevelopment plan at that time in 2012. And that approval also approved the conversion of that DCH parking deck, which was, again, not really a public parking deck, but really just a building designed to house auto inventory, to become a public parking deck to serve the redevelopment area. And then subsequent to that approval, there was a decision to use an automated parking system, and that was in part to help add some additional parking for the hotel, which was approved in 2014. Just prior to that 2014 approval in the hotel, I know I'm bouncing around a little bit, the Township Council granted an easement to MAP because it was, I don't know when this was discovered, but the building's actually built 4 inches into the right of way. And then there was a 12-inch easement granted because the lift and slide also caused some additional incursion into the right of way. So we fast forward a little bit. By the time we get to 2015, MAP is having meetings with the township's redevelopment architectural consultant and the planning board revisions committee because there was a desire on the part of some of those folks to see the facade that was approved in 2012 enhanced or made better than perhaps what had been approved in 2012. MAP through those meetings agreed to a facade redesign. And it was discovered at a certain point that that redesign was going to trigger 2 issues. One, the technical facade measured height was a couple inches higher than what was approved in 2012. And additionally, there was the 8-inch encroachment into the right-of-way, which we've been talking about this evening. So that triggered an application for amended site plan approval, came back in front of the board, more meetings with the DRC, the HPC, the planning board. Facade design was ultimately approved, and the encroachment into the right-of-way to allow that facade design was also approved. So that's in 2017. We all thought we were going to live happily ever after at that point. And then somewhat recently, the troubling issues which we've just been speaking about were discovered, which is this automated parking system known as the lift and slide. The concern was that it's not going to work, which caused a very painful decision to need to pivot in order to satisfy our obligations under the redevelopment plan to make sure we deliver ample parking and parking that's going to work. So the decision was, let's remove the lift and slide and let's extend the floor plates, which led us to this minor site plan application to do that. So if that helps in terms of just the brief history of this matter.
It does. It helps a lot. Some of it I knew, some of it I didn't know. Thank you.
Yes. So, as Chairman mentioned, the lift and slide was part of this, previous variances even being approved, but holding that in place for the time being, Art or Janice, I had a quick question. So given that, so I know we have the township having granted the encroachment easement back in 2013, but then we also have the additional 8 inches in 2017. And were we not to approve this application as it stands as of tonight, the latest version of it, what occurs with that 8-inch easement or encroachment easement from 2017? I'm just trying to understand how this plays out. Is that they still have just can you help me understand exactly where that lands on the other end of this? Were we not to approve what's before us now?
Well, I would think that land would revert back to the township and they wouldn't have the right to have, basically be removing the right for them to have the building on that 8 inches, or at least recommending to the council.
It was conditional, right, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. Without reading the actual
Okay.
easement and understanding what its terms are, and I've never seen it, I wouldn't want to opine about that or answer your question, Daniel.
Okay. Even to know that it's not a very clear, direct,
Yeah,
answer that we know tonight is helpful.
Yeah, if this helps, and I agree, there's some complexity to this issue, and I understand why you're asking the question you're asking. The application before the board is actually, it's just a minor site plan approval to extend the floor plates with the elimination of the lift and slide inside the building. There's actually no deviations or variances requested or required in conjunction with this application. It's been suggested, and I suppose one could frame it as the variance that was granted in 2017 might be rescinded by the planning board as a result of the elimination of the lift and slide. Obviously, we don't want you to do that, and we might even argue with the risk of being adversarial that you can't do that, but I don't want to go down that path because I'm hoping I can convince you that it's not necessary, but I think that's some of the complexity that we're dealing with here. Because technically speaking, you don't need to approve another variance to let us build the facade, because we're not actually changing the facade as part of this application.
Tom, do you have the
Yeah, that's a little
easement?
what I was wrestling. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Tom, do you have the easement? Could you
there's an
forward me?
Yeah, there's an easement that was granted by the Township Council in 2013. I have that. We are required to enter into another easement with the Township for the additional 8 inches, and that hasn't occurred yet. So there is no document on that.
Could you forward me the 13 easement, please?
That I can do.
Thank you.
Yeah, maybe it's just not drafted up like this at all, but in my mind, I was just wondering what role the lift and slide played in that 2017 easement, and whether it was a condition that was included or how this is even drafted up. But yeah.
I have good news on that. Our planner actually is going to speak to that this evening.
Okay.
Other questions from the board? Hearing none. Ms. Talley, I believe there's one member of the public on. Are there any questions for Mr. Cassillo regarding his testimony tonight from the public?
The call-in, I have unmuted you, whoever's called into this meeting. So if you have any questions, this is the time to ask. Again, go ahead. All right, I don't hear any questions.
I don't either.
I have a question. This is Steve Rooney. The lift and slide system was going to add another 68 parking spaces. Am I right?
So it was, yeah, the lift and slide system was 116 spaces, but functionally, we had an exhibit A11 that kind of spoke to this the last time. Basically the change you're dealing with is if the lift and slide was to be installed tomorrow, so to speak, there would be 614 spaces in the garage. Functionally speaking, and the 5th floor is valeted in that scenario because it's always valeted because of the hotel. But with the elimination of the lift and slide and the expansion of the floor plates, there's 550 spaces in the garage. Again, with the 5th floor operated as valet. So to answer your question bluntly, the loss of the lift and slide is going to result in a loss of 64 parking spaces.
Yeah, that's what I thought. And if we're going to continue to have it built, we're still losing parking. So,
that is correct, and we, as Ms. Bryoff testified last time in terms of what we think is the demand. Obviously, you've heard from your own consultant, Mr. Giosa, and then our next witness actually Mr. Sokich would speak to how we could deal with potential special events at the hotel if the demand for those special events is in the future more than what we had seen while the hotel was operating pre-COVID.
Right, but we're still losing 64 parking spaces. All right.
Yeah, that's the blunt answer is yes, and the advocacy answer would be, but with 550, generally speaking, the garage was seeing COVID demand ranging between 270 cars and 315 cars. So with a one-time peak demand of 438 cars. So we think we'll be okay, but obviously I'll let the experts speak to that.
So just, Tom, just so I'm perfectly clear. So there's 550 spaces if you extend the parking plates, right?
That's correct.
Yes.
All right, thanks.
Any other questions from the board?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Yes, okay. Assuming that the cost of providing those 64 parking spaces without the lift and slide leaves the board short of 64 spaces, what plan do you have to provide those 64 spaces in some other way? You say the enormous cost of providing them where we had originally proposed to.
So I guess to try and answer that question, so we looked at we look at this, I guess, in two different ways. One, we acknowledge that there's an obligation under the redevelopment agreement and the redevelopment plan to provide parking for the redevelopment projects in the area, and so we want to make sure that we can answer the board's questions to ensure that there's adequate parking for what's projected as necessary. I believe the redevelopment agreement contemplated at one point that there should be approximately 550, hold on, let me just make that up the right number. About 557 spaces, so we have 550. The cost question we don't really view as linked to the number of parking spaces. The cost question was really more related to kind of a hardship and balancing of the equities if we were required to push the building back 8 inches to deal with the fact that part of the reason that the board had granted the variance to allow us to encroach an additional 8 inches into the right of way was because of the lift and slide system's existence. It's not the only reason. Well, our planner will speak to that, but so we wouldn't necessarily agree that the cost components that we've been testifying to linked to that encroachment are related or analogous, or could be defined by the number of parking spaces. Now, it has been raised that if this is what you're getting at, the question of if we have ample parking to satisfy a special event at the hotel through valet parking, we believe we do, and our next witness will speak to that. That's I guess that could drive at the question you're asking, which is how is there enough parking, and what if there isn't?
Ms. Willis, do you have a follow-up question? I think you're on mute.
Okay, then am I back on?
Yes, you are.
Thank you. My question is, though, that the board in its negotiations with granting the variances were based on the fact that there was a promise of so many parking spaces, and that was what attracted the idea of doing that. Now, I know that there is always a shortage of parking, and if you cannot provide the parking through that agreed upon way, and you're saving by not doing the lift and slide, or at least not saving what you had planned to spend, but what you would have to spend. What agreement can you give to the board that will provide the 64 spaces that we need? Now, you're saying that, well, you don't need them anyway, but I think that in the long run, that's never proven to work out right, that the board doesn't need more parking.
No, I think I understand the question you're asking. And again, I'll let the planner speak to this when it's his time to testify. I don't know that we would agree that the 8-inch encroachment into the right of way was strictly speaking linked to getting a full 116 spaces in a lift and slide mechanism, but I won't quibble that obviously the resolution does speak for itself, that there was some consideration of the existence of the lift and slide as, perhaps part of the board's justification for granting the extension into the right of way. And I guess what I'll say is it's probably premature for me to talk too much to the second part of your question, except to say while I know there's a belief in Montclair that there's always a need for more parking, and I think in parts of town that is true. Historically, we haven't seen that with this deck. We're seeing, an average parking rate pre-COVID of 270 cars in what would be a 550 car deck. A 15% of the time when it's busy means 315 cars. And then one time, I think it was a special event at the hotel, there was a peak demand of 438 cars in the garage. Again, we have a capacity of 550 spaces. All that being said, though, I understand you may have your questions may be well directed to our next witness, and you may still have the concerns, and obviously we can try and address them at that time.
Just for the record of those numbers, Mr. Troutner, I don't agree with them. And I think I brought that up with Ms. Bryhoff's testimony a little bit. And I'll explore it a bit more with Mr. Sokich's upcoming testimony. But I think those numbers are a little flawed and didn't have some valuable information included. And I'm not quite sure why, but hopefully we'll get to that.
Understood.
Anything else from the board for Mr. Casillo? Okay, Mr. Troutner.
Sure. So, Mr. Sokich, maybe we can have him sworn in, and then I'll seek to qualify him as an expert in parking management.
Mr. Sokich, can you hear me, sir?
I can. I'm sorry, I can. Can you hear me?
I can. You're not on video, correct?
I just hit the video button. Let me hit it again. Start my video. Hear me now?
There you are.
Yeah, I can see and hear you.
I can see you now, sir. Would you raise your right hand, please? Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Would you please state your full name and business affiliation for the record?
Sure. My full name is Kristen Sokich. My company is Pro Park Mobility. I'm the Executive Vice President.
Now, Mr. Sokich, can you just briefly give the board the benefit of, I guess, your professional background? And I think the board will recognize you in terms of what you do and having been qualified by the board previously as expert in parking management.
Sure. I've been in the parking management business for over 25 years. I've operated over 500 parking facilities, everything from universities, hospitals, municipal garages, residential garages, commercial garages, commuter locations, valet operations, event parking, also involved in transportation. My local experience in Montclair, I operated Montclair State University for a number of years. Currently, I'm operating Mountainside Hospital. Previously operated the Crescent Street deck for about a decade, the parking garage down by the train station in Montclair, and have been operating the Valley and Bloom deck since we opened it, in addition to working with Bloomfield and doing some management for their municipality as well.
And you've prepared and submitted parking management plans for this as well as other boards as part of your professional experience. And when I say parking management plans, so for operations of parking decks?
That's correct, yes.
Mr. Chairman or Mr. Vice Chairman, I'd ask if Mr. Sokic could be qualified as an expert in parking management.
We'll accept them.
Thank you. So now, Mr. Sokic, are you familiar with the application that's being considered by the board this evening?
I am.
Yeah, and what's your understanding of the application?
My understanding is you're applying to get approval for the reduced capacity of the parking deck from the original 614 spaces that was envisioned to 550 spaces now on a self-park basis. And if we do a hybrid operation where we do some self-park and valet, we can get that number up to 700 spaces.
Now, did you prepare a parking management plan in conjunction with this matter that would address the matter which parking would be addressed by valet?
I did.
And can you, I guess, give the board the benefit of your analysis and conclusions regarding the capacity, and I think you just mentioned a moment ago how that capacity, if we were to use that parking, how many cars could be parked?
If I could just interrupt you, sir, before you begin your testimony on that. Janice, should we mark the parking plan as A12? I think that's what we're up to.
Arthur, I pre-marked the rest of the exhibits here. Let me read them.
Okay.
The renderings that were submitted, prepared by Lazard, dated March 29th, 2018, day 12. The ProPark parking plan, dated February 11th, 2021, is A13. The planning report that was prepared by my department, dated February 17th, 2021, is A14. The level G report dated February 18th, 2021 is A15. And the site plan details sheet CS 102 and CS 103 are A16.
Great. My apologies, Mr. Sokic.
No apologies needed. So going back to Tom's question, currently the garage is set up by floor for different usage. Nothing is changing in the application scenario. The first floor would still remain open for transient parking. The second and third floors would be for residential Board of Ed parkers. Fourth floor was also open for retail and residential parkers. The fifth floor has been dedicated to the MC Hotel, and the rooftop is allocated for transients as well. So none of that would change. The only time it would change would be if we ever got to a scenario where demand exceeded the self-park capacity, which to date, that's never happened. We have never, ever filled that garage at its current capacity, even without the lift and slide. It's envisioned that there may be times in the future that there may be an event or something at the hotel, which would necessitate additional valet in the deck. The plan that I put together addresses that. We would look to continue to have the first three levels of the garage stay as self-park to accommodate the residents and the Board of Ed and the parkers that are allocated to those levels. Currently, the fourth floor is lightly used. The fifth floor is the hotel, and they already valet. And the sixth floor, there's hardly ever a car up there. We would flip that into a valet parking deck for the event. We would have, upwards of 6 to 7 valets up there in addition to the regular staff for the garage. Once that floor filled, we would move the operation down to the fourth floor. We would fill that floor with valet vehicles. And in that scenario, we envision being able to accommodate 700 cars. In no time in the past have we, other than for one night, did we ever do more than 438 vehicles. On average, we're doing in the mid 300s, sometimes in the 200s. The peak number of days in any given year since we've opened, we've rarely even been in the 300s. That being said, if the lift and slide never existed, the self-park capacity of that garage is 498. We've never come close to reaching that number, and the parking demand has just been vastly below what the redevelopment plan has envisioned. Even pre-COVID, we had a number of months when the hotel was open. We had all the different uses in the garage, from, you know, office, restaurant, residential, Board of Ed, hotel, and we never came close to filling this garage. So really, even though the plan goes into detail on valeting in this worst case scenario, you know, if that happens, you know, once every, you know, year, that's probably going to be a lot. And yeah, I'll just leave it at that.
And Mr. Sokic, so you indicated that you know, we were planning for potential special events at the hotel. To your understanding, that's based upon Mr. Gioso's report, which predicted peak parking demand ranges on weekdays between 460 cars and 563 cars, weekends 514 cars to 587 cars, and then special events is really, I guess, the one that we were focused on, ranging between 560 cars and 687 cars. So that's when you say we're planning potentially to get as much as 700 cars in there, that's to accommodate that type of special event, which you just spoke to, which I know you indicated you think would probably be a rare instance.
That is correct. So even on the one evening since this deck has been open where we did the 438 cars, we didn't have the lift and slide. We didn't have access to the second floor in that evening, and we didn't have access to half of the main floor because of construction issues. And we were still able to accommodate the 438 at a much reduced capacity. You know, I could only go by the data and the demand, and we've just never ever seen the demand. And even with the hotel coming back online post-COVID, there's going to be plenty of space to deal with extra cars that may be attending a hotel event, because we're going to have full access to the deck. I mean, the last time it happened, we had a third of the deck that was kind of out of commission. Even at the reduced space of going from 616 to 550 with this valet plan, which gets us up to 700, I mean, I don't think you'll ever get close to 500 cars, never mind 700, but we obviously plan for worst case scenario.
So, and well, sticking with that, Mr. Sokic, planning for worst case scenario. So I guess I'll ask the general question to the extent you've touched on this already, but just to answer bluntly, how will you know when it might be necessary to go to valet parking? And if so, how would parking be managed in that instance?
Sure. So typically we're going to know in advance, right? I mean, currently we're also the operator of the hotel valet operation. So we meet with the hotel GM on a weekly basis. Any events at the hotel are pre-planned and discussed, and we go over, you know, what it's going to take to satiate the needs of that event, right? If there's other events in town, let's say there's a parade on Bloomfield Avenue or a local election or some other type of activity which would increase the parking demand, we're going to know in advance. You know, the only thing that we wouldn't know is the unexpected. You know, maybe if there's some type of a natural weather event that occurs that forces everybody to scatter into a garage, and it was kind of you know, not forecasted. You know, I don't think anybody could really plan for something if it's unexpected. But I would say most, if not all the time, we would know in advance when there was events, parades, or elections, and we would be able to plan accordingly.
So now, where would regular monthly parkers go? You know, how would it work at that point, assuming you've planned ahead and you know an event's coming?
Sure. So we monthly parkers would continue to park the way they're parking now. So the various user groups are assigned to various floors in the deck. The floors where we would do valet wouldn't really affect any of those users. They would continue to park on the second and third floor for the most part. The reason it works so well is because of the shared use nature of the parking. So typically, for instance, when the Board of Ed parkers are coming into the garage, that's typically when 40 or 50% of our residential people are taking their car out to go to work or do whatever they have to do for the day. So we've never we've never turned away any monthly parkers or, weren't able to accommodate them in one manner or another. So they would just continue to park on their assigned floors.
So now, in terms of the valet, I think you already testified to this, but so first you would have valet parkers directed to the 6th floor?
That is correct. So
And
they would go to the top of the floor, and once that filled, we would go down to the next level for valet, which would be the 4th floor.
So now these people have all been issued a valet ticket. What now? Can you describe what happens on retrieval?
Sure. Well, let me take it from the top real quick. So if we're going to be valeting cars, we're obviously going to put out signage directing people to go up to 6. Those vehicles would drive up to 6. So it would be greeted by a greeter in a drop-off area dedicated in the main aisle of that 6th floor. We would control the entire deck. So only incoming cars would be coming up. We would control the traffic flow, the issuing of the valet ticket, and the parking of the vehicle. The person would be asked what time they think they'll be retrieving their car. Based on that information, we would try to stack park the cars according to time of retrieval. So somebody who said that, hey, I'm probably gonna, be 4 hours, we'd put them further back in the queue. Somebody who said I'll be back in an hour or 2 hours will be up front. And this is done to limit the amount of vehicle movements that need to take place. If there's a sudden rush, typically when you're doing this type of a parking operation, you have a lot of time after the rush to rearrange the cars and park them more efficiently. So we would do some of that. And then also to mitigate any queuing issues, we have the capability of having people text for their cars. So if they know they're going to be coming back for their car, they simply text for it while they're still at the hotel or at the restaurant, and their car would be waiting for them in the queuing area on each floor when they return.
And Mr. Sokic, I think it's in your report, but how many valet staff will be present when the garage is in that hybrid valet operation?
So I kind of took an estimated typical approach here. We've got 6 valet attendants and 1 valet supervisor that would be assigned to the valet for the duration of the event. And that's in addition to the regular garage staff that would be working normally.
So now, Mr. Sokic, there was a report issued by Mr. Giosa, the board's consultant, on February 18th. Do you have an opportunity to take a look at that report?
I did.
Sure. And so, I'll just walk you through a couple things in there. I know there was some concern that it may not be realistic to get 700 spaces based on the idea that perhaps you can't get 100% of the spaces illustrated in your parking management plan occupied. They really might only be in the 90-95% range, and that maybe is in part because Mr. Joseph had highlighted concerns about there's columns and things in that deck. Can you speak to that? Whether or not to that concern expressed by Mr. Joseph?
Yeah, sure. So a few things there. the 700 car capacity, you know, is really based on just valeting the 3 upper floors of the deck. If capacity was a concern, we could always expand valet to the 3rd floor, to the 2nd floor, and down to the 1st floor and get a lot more cars than 700. In terms of the columns, there's no columns on the roof, and that would be our main valet pickup and drop off area to begin with. If needed, we would go down to the 4th floor. There are columns on the 4th floor. They're, from a parking perspective, they're very narrow. They're 14 inches wide. If you go into most garages, you'll find columns that are usually 2 to 3 feet wide. The illustrations that were provided in the parking plan were just that. They were illustrations. We would make some field adjustments. You know, if we had to move one of the rows over a foot or 2 foot to accommodate a column, or leave one space empty because a column was in the way, we would do that. But from my experience, there's plenty of room for us to make field adjustments to compensate for any column issues we may experience on the 4th floor. And then the other thing I'd like to bring up is, you know, in the valet plan, you know, I've got cars parked, you know, 4 deep, 5 deep, 3 deep. This is typical. You know, if you park anywhere where there's valet, you know, they're parking cars deep. This deck used to be a car dealership deck. They used to park the cars 9 and 10 deep. I don't know if anybody commutes from Hoboken, but you know, there's a big parking lot right outside the pass station there. I actually operated it at one time. You know, we parked cars 9 deep in that deck, with waves of people coming in and out once they're coming in and off of trains. So what I proposed is not out of the ordinary for a valet parking operation.
And Mr. Sokich, I just want to ask you on that point in terms of the cars being potentially parked 6 deeps in configuration. I know Mr. Joseph expressed a concern about, you know, retrieval times in a timely fashion. Can you just speak to that in your kind of operational experience? If you were to have a cars parked 6 deeps, you know, what's your feeling in terms of, you know, is this a practical way or operation?
Yeah. So I mean, some of it I mentioned a little earlier in my testimony. We try to mitigate wait times by asking people when they think they're going to return. We use technology, text for your car. We also enable people to pay for their parking prior to them even getting to the deck. So they could pay right on their mobile phone and, you know, not have to wait while they're in the deck for their parking to get processed. You know, that's what we can do, and that's what we can control. Is there going to be somebody that, you know, just shows up out of the blue, or maybe they said they're going to be 4 hours and, you know, they had to rush home for some reason? Yeah, that happens all the time. But based on the staffing levels we have, I mean, I've got on, you know, up on the 6th floor, 135 cars. I'm going to have 7 people up there. You know, even if I have to move 3 cars to get one out, we should be fine. I mean, there shouldn't be anybody waiting any extra length of time in this scenario. I mean, we're talking 135 cars up there, down to 4, you got a little bit more. I think it's 146. But with the amount of valet hours that we're going to have, and the fact that it's going to be a managed situation, and we're doing all these other things to kind of remedy wait times, it should work pretty well.
Now, it may be a similar answer to some of the things you've already said, but Mr. Jost also raised some concerns about stairs and elevator towers potentially being blocked by rows of parked cars, and additionally, I think it's related potentially, you know, where the valet pickup area is. I guess, where does somebody go to hand their ticket to the valet standing, and how do they get there? If you could just
yeah, sure. So when I had these illustrations done, they were basically just to show the capacity. The waiting areas are going to be by the elevator vestibules. That will be where the public will exit. That's also where they're going to be coming up to pick up their cars. I know on I think it was the 6th floor, we showed cars parked in front of the elevators, but we would open up a 4-foot walkway to allow for pedestrians to get from the elevator to that main drive aisle where they would pick up their vehicle, simply by shifting some of the cars over or just parking them a little differently to free up that 4-foot walkway.
Now, Mr. Sokic, there was a request, I guess, for a question about whether or not the applicant can confirm that they're not going to close or refuse access to the parking garage unless it's operating in I think what Mr. Joseph was referring to as he was calling it valet step 6, or a full valet, I guess, valet on every floor of the garage. I guess, can you confirm, I guess it's that, there's no anticipation of ever closing this garage, I think, because the suggestion is floors 1 through 3 are always going to remain in a self-park configuration?
Yeah, so let me address that a little deeper, since I know it's come up in other planning board meetings. We have never closed this garage for capacity issues. We've never closed this garage completely. There's been a handful of times, probably less than 6, where temporarily transients were prevented from coming into the deck. And one time that lasted for 3 hours. The rest of the times it was no more than an hour, maybe an hour and a half. And the reason that handful of times took place had nothing to do with capacity. It had everything to do with what was going on in the garage on a construction basis. So there were times where new lighting was installed. There were times when new membrane was being laid out on each floor. There was times when work was being done on a given ramp. The construction of the lift and slide necessitated, them moving materials around and doing various things. So, during the course of all these years, we've always worked hand in hand with the lift and slide people, with Joe Casillo's people. But, at the end of the day, because of safety measures, we had to make a decision to close it off temporarily to accommodate what was taking place in the deck with some of the construction. That I just want to make it clear that it was not because of occupancy. It would be no different than, somebody driving down a street where they're doing construction and, the construction people are doing the best they can to keep the street open 95% of the time. But occasionally they got to stop the traffic, 100% because, a machine is going to take up the whole roadway. So it's not really too different in this parking deck. Those few times when we did have to close it off was really for safety reasons, or an issue where something was supposed to be finished by so-and-so time, but then all of a sudden it kind of bled into the rush hour in the evening. And, we were also handicapped by not having the Orange Road egress open. So, this deck is supposed to have 5 lanes, 2 entrances and 3 exits. We've been operating with 3 lanes for a good part of that time. So because of the traffic flow, because of the construction issues, there were times where we had to turn it off. And like I said, no more than on average an hour and a half, and really not more than half a dozen times.
And short answer, we don't anticipate closing it, particularly once the deck is finished.
I honestly feel that we'll never close the deck. I mean, if there was no redevelopment plan and they just opened this garage the way it was with 498 spots and never invested a penny into it, you'd be fine.
So now, 2 last questions, Mr. Sokic, before I'll ask you, I guess, to sum up. There was a concern expressed by Mr. Giosa regarding, I guess, drivers who maybe have retrieved their cars, or people who are coming into park. They're, I guess, on the 1st and 2nd and 3rd level, and then you have, valet, I guess, operations taking place, valet retrievals taking place, and traffic potentially mixing. Can you speak to, I guess, how safety will be ensured on the 6th and the 4th floor? Else it needs to be.
Sure. I'll speak to the whole deck to start with. I don't think we've ever had a damage claim in the garage based on an accident. You know, we've had some claims where people said, hey, there was a line leak on my car, or they parked it and somebody hit their car while it was parked. But we've never had an accident on any of those ramps with, you know, cars colliding into each other or anything even close to that. And then the other thing is, you know, that 1 in 100 chance that we have to valet, you know, it's going to be controlled. We're not just parking the cars, we're controlling the traffic flow from 6 to 5, from 5 to 4. You know, the other levels are going to be operating as usual, so there'll be no need on those levels. But we'll be controlling the access to the ramps, who goes up, who goes down, to minimize any issues with traffic during the times of these events.
And a question was raised at the prior meeting about the 48 Board of Education spaces remaining self-park. Is that what's envisioned even if the deck went into this hybrid valet capacity?
That's absolutely correct. Nothing would change for the Board of Ed. They would continue to have the same access as they do today to the 2nd and 3rd floor to park, you know, where they wish.
Okay. So, Mr. Sokic, I guess to sum up, you know, based on all the testimony you just provided, in your opinion, does the parking management plan you presented allow the maximum parking demand, which Ms. Freihoff and others have, Mr. Giosa and others have projected to be accommodated in this deck?
Yes, I believe the plan will work, and I don't foresee any issues with capacity. It'll be a managed situation at times when needed, but you know, as has been the case, you know, we're able to accommodate all the user groups, and I don't think that'll change. I mean, we've already been doing it.
And in your opinion, will implementing this parking management plan allow the deck to operate safely and efficiently from a circulation and parking standpoint?
Yes, it'll actually operate better because we'll have access to the exit on Orange Road, and we won't have any lift and slide operation happen on the ground floor. So if anything, it's going to improve the traffic flow within the deck.
Mr. Chairman, I don't have any further questions, but I have a suspicion that members of the board and the public may. So
I would imagine so, and maybe I'll start with a couple of questions. Yeah, Mr. Sokic, you mentioned closing the lot for certain reasons at times. Can you give me an idea of just, was that, you know, 2016, 2018? Do you recall when those events were?
Say 2018, 2019, early 2019.
And did you testify in another matter before the board that those sandwich boards were put up that said lot full because you were reserving parking for, you know, the regular users of the lot?
That, I don't think that was my testimony, no.
It wasn't your testimony regarding this particular parking deck?
That we put up sandwich board signs that said capacity full?
I think it said lot, well, I think it was lot full was what was the member of the public had mentioned, and you said.
Yeah, I don't think I testified to that, but there may have been sandwich board signs that said something like that. But that's not indicative of what was actually taking place. I mean, that's a typical sign you probably find at 99% of any valet, or not any, you know, most garages would have a garage full sign that they roll out. In this case, when we closed, it wasn't because we were full. Like I had testified, it was because of construction, safety concerns, and stuff of that nature.
Well, what I thought you had testified to before at the previous hearing was that it was to reserve, let's see what I have here. It was to reserve enough parking spaces for the regular users of the lot. And that's what I'm trying to get at, is how if there's
Yeah,
not
I'm
a
saying I don't
capacity
think that was my
issue,
testimony. I don't know if you have it, you can read it back, but I don't recall ever testifying to that.
there was a member of the public that was asking about it, and I think over the course of a couple different evenings, there was
I
discussion.
recall somebody from the public saying that, you know, the garage was full, I couldn't get my car in, but I don't recall giving them that answer that.
Could
you
I
brought
speak
up.
to that?
Sure.
Yes, because I was not, there may have been members of the public, but I was one of the people who raised it as a board member. I personally had seen signs that said that it was being reserved for the contract customers. And I asked that question, and I don't know if it was you who testified or exactly which member testified, but I do recall
So-
that the answer was.
So to your point, because the monthly people are folks that live there or work there, we shut it down those few times to make sure that they had space. But then soon as we realized or knew that there wasn't going to be an issue because of whatever was taking place, construction or obstructions or whatever it may be, we opened it back up. And like I said earlier, in most cases, it was only for like an hour and a half. I think there was only one time where we actually had it closed to transients for about 3 hours.
I guess, go ahead, Mr. Trotner.
I was just saying, yeah, Mr. Sokich, I just want to clarify. It's just so I think, so frankly, so I understand. I think what you might have just said is because of construction, which I'm guessing had a floor or two closed at one point in time, maybe for an hour or two or longer. There were signs that were put up to close the deck, and in part, there was some concern that you were trying to hold some spaces for monthly parkers. Because of the concern that so many other spaces were out of commission because of construction. I don't know if I'm putting words in your mouth, but is that
Well, there was a time, I think it was over like a 6-week period where they were putting down new membrane from the top of the deck to the lowest level, and we would lose a floor for like a week at a time. And during that time, you know, things got, we try to do it in phases, try to keep the ramps open, try to, you know, they would tell us we could get this space back, and, you know, then they would take over some other space. It was a fluid situation, and, you know, there were times where, like I said, garage got closed to transients for a few hours.
It would seem that that would be a time for using the valet parking, but that was not the option that was chosen.
Well, you know, if we could have planned for it, we would have done valet parking. Like I said, it's, you know, we don't control what takes place with the construction people. We only control, you know, who's coming in, who's going out, and where they could park. You know, even when you have the best plans, sometimes things go sideways. And, you know, we were dealing with lift and slide construction, membrane, lighting installations, widening of ramps, I mean, drainage replacement. You know, this deck, it's been ongoing renovations since the day we opened. You know, there's been a lot taking place in there. And to be frank with you, I mean, the fact that it's only been maybe a half a dozen times where we've had these disruptions really, you know, bodes well. I mean, the demand for the parking has been nowhere near what the redevelopment plan envisioned. Nowhere near. All you got to do is look at the data. The vast majority of the data, the usage is well below the redevelopment plan. So, you know, if you want to look at it from the overall standpoint, I mean, this garage is vastly underutilized. I mean, we're spending time here talking about how, you know, a couple of times, you know, it got shut down here and there, but, you know, the story of this garage is not those couple of times. The story of this garage is how underutilized it's been.
Question for you, but isn't that because the hotel hasn't been open? It hasn't been open. It hasn't been open.
The hotel was open for a good 6 months before Corona hit.
I know, but it wasn't open at full. It was just starting. It was a new venture. You know, it wasn't filled to capacity. What
If
was
the
it?
hotel, well, look, I don't know what their occupancy rates for rooms have been, but what I can tell you is they've never filled the 5th floor.
I know, but they haven't scheduled weddings or bar mitzvahs or all that kind of stuff because they're brand new.
Okay.
So
okay,
that to
I'll
me,
give you
your
that.
data is
They haven't had
flawed.
a full. They haven't had a full event season. You're absolutely correct. But let's say they do, we're still going to have plenty of space. There's no doubt in my mind.
So I have another question. So are residents given an assigned spot?
No.
So when you look at your 700 spaces needed scenario, how does it work on the 4th floor when I'm a resident and where am I gonna, how is my parking determined? Do I have to valet park then, or?
No. So you're not assigned a spot, you're assigned levels. So if you're a resident, you could park in the 2nd, 3rd, or 4th level. The 4th level is lightly used.
No, in your worst case scenario, there's supposed to be, there's 95 spots available on the 4th floor. In your worst case scenario, it's 146. So you have 15 more spaces being utilized. How am I, as a resident, what am I supposed to do? I mean, they don't reserve for the residents then?
So let me take you through how it works on the ground. So when you come into the garage, you're a resident, your preference for most people is to park in the closest space that you could find. When you drive into this garage, you're going to look for a space on 2. If you find a space, you're going to park there. If it's full, you're going to go to 3. If you find a space, you're going to park there. 4 is your last option. And our numbers are light for residential parkers. I mean, we're doing like 0.9 cars per dwelling unit, which is 10% less than a 1-for-1 ratio. If you go to the 4th floor, you might find maybe 5 or 10 cars there. If we need to flip it to a valet scenario, those cars will be accommodated in the valet scenario. If we need to rearrange those cars, we have tools in our toolkit where we could, simply roll the car into a spot where it's not going to interfere with the overall traffic for the valet. And that's how we would address it.
So I'm a resident and I go in the parking lot. What's to prevent me from parking on the 1st floor?
Your access card. So when we issue access cards, it gets coded, credentialed for what floors you could go to. So that access card for a resident will only work to get them to the 2nd floor and above. It's not going to work to get into the 1st floor.
And how about a retail person?
Same thing.
They have an access card that says where they can
If they're a monthly retail person, yes. If there's somebody that comes in on a transient basis, then they can park on the 1st floor.
So then what are the retail numbers for floors 2 through 4 that are shown on the screen?
What do you mean, what are the retail numbers? Can you shed a little more?
I mean, you've got it listed that, who are the retail people then that can park on 2, 3, and 4?
Regis, the restaurant folks, nail salon, we've got monthly parkers that are retail employees.
What about the public? That's what we're talking about.
Yeah, where does the public park?
I'm sorry?
Where does the public park?
The public parks on the main floor.
Are you
When that's full,
in which that parking on the main floor?
The public has a choice. They could go to the 1st floor. They could go onto the upper floors, on the 4th floor, the 6th floor. It's all open to the public. Most of our business here is monthly customers. The transient portion is not as robust as the credentialed parkers who are monthlies.
We have recently had snowstorms in which the public has, the transient has needed to park in public parking lots.
Correct.
I know that in the last major storm, it was said that the parking lots were full. What is the relationship between those needs and the availability of the deck?
Yeah, so look, I used to run the city garages, right? And during any major storm, people would want to get their cars off the street so they don't get plowed in and you would find heavier usage prior and during to a snowstorm. This deck's not that different. We do get heavier usage, but we've been operating now for what, 4.5 years. We've never had to close it down during a snowstorm. We do get heavier traffic prior to a snowstorm for sure. You get people that are used to parking on the streets. They don't want to get buried. They come into the garage, but we've never, unlike the Crescent Street deck, we've never had to turn anybody away. And I can tell you, I used to run the Crescent Street deck. That place used to regularly, every weekend, turn people away.
Why don't you run the Crescent deck anymore?
And that's part of my point, though. If there's a deck at the Crescent Street that's turning people away, it would imply that the 64 spaces could be used if they were available.
So I guess I should jump in here just to clarify. I mean, our read of our obligation is obviously to service the parking for the redevelopment projects that are within this redevelopment area. I mean, certainly it's a public parking deck, so in the event of a snowstorm or some other, unexpected issue in town or in the region where, there's 550 spaces in the garage, but we wouldn't view necessarily the parking calculus to be, an obligation to ensure that there's ample parking for everyone in Montclair, obviously in the event of a snowstorm. I don't think that's what you're suggesting either, but I just wanted to point out, obviously we're talking about, or we're focused on sort of demand as related to the specific projects. And obviously we put out our numbers. Obviously the board has Mr. Gios's numbers, but Mr. Gios is noting, generally speaking, between 460 and 563 cars at a high on weekdays. That these are projections, potentially. Weekends and holidays, 514 cars at a low, 587 at a high on weekends and holidays. And then obviously the thing we've been focused on, the special events, where maybe between 560 and 687 cars. That being the 687, obviously the one that we really wanted to keep an eye on. And Mr. Sokic, just to, I guess, frame it in a question, if we were experiencing the other highs on a weekday or weekend or holiday, going up to 587, I assume you could deal with that. There's 550 self-park spaces, and you could deal by going into a relatively, I assume, easy valet scenario to pick up that, additional 13 to 37 cars. And then if a special event was more in the 560 to 600 range, I assume similarly, it's not a heavy lift to address that via valet, correct?
That is correct.
Could you answer Ms. Lockman's question? Why don't you operate the Crescent deck anymore?
Sure, I'd love to answer that. I operated my company, Pro Park Mobility. We operated that deck since its opening. We were there for 10 years through a few different administrations, and went out to bid, and they chose somebody else. So they got a different company in there now for the last, couple of years.
Mm-hmm. So I've used this deck on 2 occasions. One was when
Are you talking about the Crescent or the Orange Road deck?
I'm sorry, the Orange Road. One was the evening of the grand opening of the hotel. They had a reception.
It was sometime in August. August 2019.
Probably. Yeah. And I went and I valet parked, and I came out of the party, and I waited about an hour and 20 minutes for my car to come out, and the young
you probably did.
It was a mess.
So that evening, we were told that we would be able to park some cars next door, and in the middle of the event, the police came by and said we had to remove about 80 cars from that lot. And the reason we were going to do it from park some of the cars at the lot, it was just right next to the hotel. It just, from a customer service standpoint, it was easy. The lot was empty. We were told by hotel management we could park there. And then in the middle of the event, the Montclair Police Department said that was private property and all cars had to be moved. And that kind of threw a huge monkey wrench into things because in the middle of the event, we had to take those cars from that lot, bring them up into the garage, and it created some chaos. Obviously, that was a one-off, one-time event. It was a learning experience, and that won't happen again.
Okay. The other time I parked, I was visiting people who were staying at the hotel, and I parked in the deck to visit them. And I have to say, with all due respect to all of you, it was pretty scary. The turns that you make to go from one level to another, they are tight and they were scary. I have a small SUV, and I've parked in many, many decks over my lifetime.
Yeah.
And this is a tight deck. It's
Yeah.
not your
So,
normal,
look,
regular deck.
I'll concur with you in that I drive a large SUV, and I know when I go into the deck with my large SUV, I feel like, you know, the roof is going to get ripped off because
Yes.
you got the steel girders hanging down.
Yep.
But, you know, it's just optics. I mean, at the end of the day, the height is there to accommodate SUVs. You know, are some of the turning radiuses tight? You know, probably,
Yes.
but you know, it's an existing garage that was there for many years before we
Yeah.
took it over.
It's a
and
bear.
That's the condition it's in.
It's a bear. It's not a great deck. Yes. Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Other questions?
Yeah, Mr. Troutner, I have a question, but I'm not sure whether this witness is the appropriate witness to answer it because he's more talking about management of the parking, but his parking plan raises, you know, my question. As we've just stated, this deck was adapted for this. It wasn't designed, you know, for this public parking deck that we're employing it to now. We've got this parking plan that potentially shows an extra 300-400 tons of cars on each floor over and above the regular parking that's would be plotted out with drive aisles and such. Is the building constructed to withhandle the extra weight?
I'm going to guess that this is not.
Don't guess.
Yeah.
Don't guess.
Okay.
Guessing is bad.
Well, I was being a little facetious, but no, Mr. Sokich would not be the correct witness for that question. Mr. Tracy is on the call. I'm not sure if Mr. Tracy can answer that question off the top of his head, but I'll give it a shot, or otherwise, Mr. Tracy, are you there?
I'm here, if you can hear me.
Yeah, if you heard that question, is that something you can answer? Would you need to look into that and get back to Chairman Nguyen?
No, the deck is absolutely designed to accommodate a valet parking operation. So
that wasn't my question. My question was it designed to accommodate the extra weight?
Yeah, the load. No, so the parking deck has a floor loading requirement.
Uh-huh.
It's regardless if it's a self park or a valet park. The deck certainly can accommodate the added load, or was originally designed for a load associated with valet parking.
Mr. Tracy, I just want to acknowledge that you testified earlier in this proceeding, correct?
Yes, sir.
And so I just want to reiterate that with your last answers, you still remain under oath, even though you answered those questions without being re-sworn. You acknowledge that, correct?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
My apologies.
I'm sorry. Could I go back and finish with Mr. Sokich? I'd like if Mr. Giosef could respond to the comments that Mr. Sokich made about the comments that Jerry had in his memo. What do you think, Mr. Giosa, of the responses that ProPark made?
Okay, I'd be happy to. The first thing I'd like to say is that as reviewers of this project and as planners and professionals, we're not trying to predict what happened during a pandemic or last year or while a project was maturing, but we're trying to predict what's going to happen 5 years from now, 10 years from now. I mean, these are decisions that are going to have ramifications well into the future. So, with that said, there's definitely going to be a maturation of land uses in the area of this garage, with the vaccinations coming on board and things returning to normal over a period of time. I'm sure the parking demand is going to increase over time, and that we are going to be needing these increased parking supply scenarios in this deck. The predictions made by the applicant even in the 2014 application indicates parking demand projections as high as 620. So, the fact that we've had depressed or below normal parking demand activity over the past couple of years is not really germane to our review. At least I don't think so. He has addressed most of the points brought up in my February 18th memorandum. I don't necessarily agree with all of them. Some of the columns shown are directly in the center of parking aisles shown. So redrafting the valet parking plans with the columns shown will certainly result in a reduction of parking stalls. In terms of the concerns about the egress of valet customers dropping off their cars on the 4th and 5th floors, there are, it appears there are serious blockages of the egress towers here. Kristen mentioned that, they can move the cars over 4 feet, but this is something that the fire marshal will surely have to weigh in on. And, so that's another hurdle that would need to be crossed in terms of getting approval of a valet plan such as this. With respect to some previous comments I made with respect to possibly having a dedicated township, 48 space township parking area, that is still under review, I understand, from the township's legal experts. So I think that would also influence the parking management plan, but I think that kind of summarizes what my reaction to the testimony we've heard tonight.
Mr. Giosa, do you have an idea or an estimation of how many valet spaces would be lost due to those columns? And due to maybe some of the other issues you mentioned about the fire marshal weighing in on the safety. And, I think about how do the valet operators or members of the public exit the structure in an emergency? Can they get to the stairwells in a reasonable fashion? If you take that all into account, do you have an idea of what the, final tally of parking spaces might be?
I could venture to guess we'd be in the order of magnitude of about maybe 30 or 40 spots.
So it would probably be down to 640 to 670 spaces available?
Yeah, but again, that's that's not a technical evaluation. It's just a general impression, based on a review of these plans that are really not, they're basically illustrations. They're not scaled, for a technical review.
Chair, I gather what you need to see is the parking layout plan and the valet plan should be on the site plan, right? That would help evaluate this.
Yeah, in a scaled drawing, and in addition, to show the drop off and pickup areas.
Right.
He mentions them in the plan, but they're not physically located on the floor plates. So that would also assist in doing a more comprehensive review.
Right.
Yeah, because I think that's where I'm struggling is, I think at the end of the day, we want to make sure that this is going to work. And right now, it just seems like there's a pictogram of cars on a map that isn't to scale. It's illustrative, as the parking management plan says, and it just, it cars in what I think would be an egress, for pedestrians and for the workers if there was an emergency to get out of the structure in a fire or anything else like that. It's not clear that it's going to work to me. And I think that's what I'm really struggling with. And I think if some of these, what some may see as maybe minor issues are actually thought through a bit, such as you can't put a car on a column. And look, I understand, Mr. Sokich, that really good valet operators can park a car anywhere as long as there's an inch or two on either side. I get it. I've seen it. I've been in some of the, parking operations and valet operations in the city. But, there's still limitations. You can't park a car on a column. And it's things like that cause me to wonder what else isn't included here, what else wasn't thought through. And so I think I agree, Ms. Talley. For me, I would like to see it scaled out and, to put a critical eye on it and be sure that we can hit the demand that we're looking at. And, I still struggle with some of the data that Ms. Bryhoff relied upon, some of the data that, Mr. Sokich, I believe it was Ms. Bryhoff's testimony that Mr. Sokich said that some of the data was unusable due to operational conditions. And I suppose we could dig into that a little bit, but I don't know if it would really necessarily change things, because I believe those data were used in a different application and relied upon by other experts. So I'm a little confused. Maybe you should respond to that, Mr. Sokich. Why were some of those data unusable?
You got to start with the original statement. I don't know who Ms. Bryhoff is.
Oh, I'm sorry, Kristen. It's Michelle Bryhoff from Mazer. She submitted the parking management report. I know you've met her on a phone call, but I know you guys don't have a long history together.
Yeah, no, and I don't know what the comment that she made. It's the first time I'm hearing about it.
So in her report, there were periods. So she provided a chart of parking demand. How many cars were going into the parking deck over a certain period of time. There were gaps in it, and I believe, if I noted it correctly here, and I have it on one of these screens. Let's say data from 10/16 to 10/29, and I believe this would be for the year 2019, and also 11/16 invalidated due to operational conditions. And if I'm
sorry, 10/16 to what?
10/29. 10/16 to 10/29, and then also 11/16. And if I have Ms. Bryhoff's testimony correct, she said she got those numbers from you, and it wasn't known to her why those data were invalidated.
Yeah, this is the first I'm hearing of it. She didn't get the data directly from me. She probably got it from our location manager that oversees the site. So I'd have to look into it for you, but I'm just looking 10/16.
So
I don't have the data. I don't have the data in front of me to confirm.
Yeah, may I make a suggestion? Yeah, but we'll have Mr. Sokich review Ms. Bryhoff's report, and so we could give a coherent answer to this question without too much trying to do this on the fly.
Right, and I appreciate that. It's just that when for me, when I see questions like that where, it's not clear among a team or between experts as to what's going on, it really does make me wonder, okay, well, how much can we rely upon these reports then?
I mean, I think the data, I don't know specifically what data was missing, but I know the system that's in place in that garage is, one of the top tier manufacturers of access control. I don't think there's any reason that we wouldn't be able to get this data. I'd have to look, let me look into it.
We can
happy to
confirm
provide the data.
Yeah, we can confirm the data, and I want to speak to my client if possible before I commit to further stuff. But I'll note the board's request regarding, I guess, an updated parking management plan to try and confirm some of the things that have been raised on the call. I do note that there was a July 9th, 2012 approval that the board did, and this was before the lift and slide. And at least at that time, there was a contemplation that the garage would handily be able to valet 686 cars. So I'm hoping that we can, get to a point where we can alleviate some concerns that, the 700 number doesn't drop to 640. Put it that way. Even if there's some debate about, is 700 690 or 680. But let me, if we could take a break, I could speak to my client and we could figure out maybe how to complete the meeting as it's a 10 of 10. Request, yeah.
Yeah, let's make sure we don't have any more questions from the board, and then we'll get to the questions from the public for Mr. Sokic, and then my plan is to take a break after that.
I appreciate that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
No problem. Any other questions from the board for Mr. Sokic? Okay, hearing none. I know there is still a member of the public on the line, and so member of the public, if you have a question for Mr. Sokic about his testimony, the line is unmuted and you're welcome to speak up. Okay. Hearing nothing. If you do have a question, you can always email Ms. Talley, jtalley, Talley, @montclairnjusa.org. Okay, let's take a 10-minute break.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I think we have most of the board back. It looks like it's from what I can see. Mr. Neese, are you back? I think we have most of the board back. It looks like it's from what I can see. Mr. Neese, excellent. We have most of the board back. It looks like it's we're back. Looks like we're back on the record. Mr. Troutner, excellent.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So having consulted with my client, yes, we would be pleased to prepare what I think the board is requesting, which is a depiction of the valet parking scenario in I guess a scaled drawing as opposed to the illustrative drawings that hopefully can bring some clarification to these questions that have been raised. Additionally, there was the question of the parking data, which Mr. Sokich indicated he would look into, and we can get back to the board on that. That being said, Mr. Chairman, it's 10:03. We do have one more witness, Jim Miller, our planner. But I at the risk of being presumptuous, I was going to maybe ask if we make it an early evening, because I think it'll go smoother if we can finish up, hopefully to the board's satisfaction, some of these parking concerns, and then kind of wrap it all up with the planning testimony and hopefully the next and what will hopefully be a final hearing.
That sounds about right to me. Yes. So, Ms. Talley, what's our next meeting for this?
Well, my suggestion would be to carry this to March 22nd. That way you'll have enough time to submit the revised drawings and additional data before the meeting.
I think that probably makes sense.
Okay.
Okay, so we'll carry it to March 22nd. No additional notice will be provided, and do we need any waivers of time or anything like that?
I think you should grant us, Tom, any waivers of time until at least till March 22nd.
We consent. Yes.
Okay.
Excellent. We will see you back then.
Great. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Okay, next up, we don't have any new business tonight. Do we have any committee reports to go through?
Actually, there's two things I'd just like to bring to your attention. The zoning subcommittee had met previously on some of the zoning issues. They submitted I submitted the comments and the recommendations for some of the zoning changes that we had discussed at the planning board to the Economic Development Committee. Right now, it's tentatively planned for discussion at the council at their first meeting in March, which is March 2nd, and hopefully it'll be introduced for adoption as an ordinance at the March 16th council meeting. Those are the first wave of zoning changes. Graham and I are working on the additional changes, responding to some of the comments made by members of the planning board and the Board of Adjustment to implement some of the additional recommendations in the master plan. So we're trying to put that together in a format that's easy for everybody to follow. So that's in the works. But I just wanted to give you the tentative dates of March 2nd and March 16th at the council level.
Okay.
The second item I wanted to talk to you about is, I think some of you are aware that the municipal land use law has been amended, requiring a new element of the master plan called the climate change related hazard vulnerability assessment. It's triggered when municipalities do their land use elements. Obviously, we did ours in 2014, so we're not required to do it right now, but it is now defined, and there's requirements that are set forth in the municipal land use law. I did send that information to the Environmental Commission because they are very interested in what's involved in a climate change related hazard vulnerability assessment, and I'll be working with them to discuss it and possibly look at funding sources to try and find a way to conduct such a study for Montclair.
Great.
And Janice, that would be the extent of the action we might take now, is that right? And I'm just asking, thinking in advance of the next round for updating, our master plan, whether there's any actions we can take now to, make that process a little smoother, given this new requirement, this whole new section that we'll be putting in.
Yeah, it's honestly, it's pretty technical and it's very detailed. For instance, it requires a build-out analysis of the municipality, which we're largely built out anyway, but it's very, there's a lot of technical requirements in it with a lot of engineering involvement, and obviously environmental issues. So it's not something that we can do on our own.
Right.
And probably would have to find some outside funding to do. So that's more of a long-term plan.
Is there a deadline, Janice, for when it has to be done?
No, it's we're not required to, you do it when you do it, whenever you amend a new, prepare a new land use plan or a new master plan,
Yeah.
then it's required. So if you don't, it's not a requirement if you're not in the middle of preparing a new one.
But don't we have to do a new plan by 2024?
No, that's just a reexamination report. That's not a new plan.
But the last
Oh, I
reexamination.
misunderstood. I thought we would have to do it at the reexamination report, but
No, you
maybe I
do
misunderstood.
not have to do it. You only have to do it if you're preparing a new land use plan. A reexamination plan is not an amendment to your master plan. All it is an evaluation of your master plan and your zoning ordinances, and it makes recommendations.
Yeah, we did that in 2016, but don't we have to do a new master plan every 10 years?
No, you have to re-examine it every 10 years. You don't have to do a new master plan.
Okay, thank you.
So Janice, if when we just recently updated our land use and circulation element, if that, happened now, would we have to have this climate change plan or adaptation plan done?
I don't think it's triggered by an amendment. I think it's triggered when you're doing a whole new plan. That's when it's triggered. But I'll have to look at that in more detail.
Okay. I'm just wondering if there's a benefit to doing it sooner rather than later. I mean, outside of the, speaking for the Environmental Commission, outside of the good reasons to, evaluate the impacts of climate change on the township, if it makes sense to do it now as opposed to when we have a pressing, amendment for the land use and circulation element, will that kind of stop us from doing the planning piece if we don't have the climate change piece in hand?
I don't believe so. I have the regulations right here in front of me. It'd be nice to do, like I said, but we can look into it, but we certainly don't have to do it right now.
Okay.
And I think a lot of these things really apply to areas that are much more exposed than Montclair, so it may not be that extensive of a lift on our part. But I think it's something, it will require outside assistance.
Okay.
Okay.
Anything else on the committee reports?
The Development Review Committee is meeting next week. We have a couple of, the Development Review Committee's had some minor applications, freestanding signs. I think we have a freestanding sign coming up, and nothing pretty major, significant, but they've been fairly busy. So that's all I have to report in terms of the committees.
Okay, thank you. Next up, we have payment of bills. I took a look at the bills and I have no issues with the bills. Nobody else is jumping in, so then I would move to approve the bills.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Okay,
Okay, I think that's it. Do we need a motion to adjourn?
we do.
Sure. I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Second that?
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Abstentions? Okay. All right, well, everybody have a good rest of your evening.
Great night.
Everyone?
Thanks, everybody.
Good
See
night.
you in a couple weeks.
Good one.
Good night.
All right.